Hello, Kayla.
Hi.
Hi, this is Jake. You're on the air on WCSB.
Oh, great. Well, good morning.
Good morning. I'm pronouncing your name right. Great. Kier La Janisse?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Where are you right now?
I'm in Toronto, Canada.
Toronto. Cool. And you're you live there?
Yeah. Yeah, I moved here in June.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I knew you were or you were based in Montreal for a while, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I just moved over here recently, so.
Right. And yeah, so cool. Thanks for coming on to the show. I'm glad to be talking to you.
No problem.
Right. I know you're very busy, so I'll get right into it. So your book, House of Psychotic Women, that came out in like 2012 or 2013, right?
2012.
2012.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I got it at the beginning of 2013, and I was just, I had never heard of you before that, and I was just blown away by the book. I think it's a very radical and insightful book, innovative, the first of its kind. What was your inspiration for writing it? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think for a long time I had, I used to write for fanzines and Fangoria and stuff like that, and a friend of mine just pointed out one day that every film that I tended to rave about the most, or, the things that I really liked, they all had these crazy women in them. And I worked at a video store for many years, and the customers would say the same thing. Like, every movie you recommend to us has some crazy woman in it. And so I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I just, so at first I was just going to do a book of sort of essays that was maybe half essays I'd already written for other magazines, just reprinted, and then a few new ones, and then make a book that maybe had 10 essays in it or something. But then I just kept procrastinating about working on it, and, years were passing, and then the internet kind of exploded, and there was all this great film criticism coming out on the internet, and also a lot of the films that I wanted to write about, which had been very obscure movies that I had to mail order and stuff like that, suddenly were being coming out on DVD with extras, and, so all of a sudden this idea of doing like 10 essays in a book seemed really pointless to me. And so I sat on it again, and I just wasn't sure what I was going to do with it, and, so I kept writing it and rewriting it and rewriting it, and then, I was basically on the verge of throwing it out, like just throwing it in the garbage, and then a friend of mine was like, why don't you... Actually, Caleb Bettenstall, I don't know if you know who that is. He wrote the book about Canadian horror called They Came From Within.
Oh, yeah, I've read that book. Yeah, that's a great book.
Yeah, so he was one of the friends that sort of urged me to go an autobiographical route. Because he said that that when in conversation I would often talk about these films from an autobiographical perspective. And so he said, why don't you do that? And I was just like, oh, God, that seems so self-indulgent to me. Why, who would want to read that, And so I really didn't want to do it. But I thought, well, I'll try. I'll try writing it like that and see how I like it. And once I started doing it that way, the writing just started to come a lot easier, It just was, everything was happening faster once I started writing it from that perspective. But I still struggled with the structure of it a lot, like how to put it together, how to make everything flow back and forth between, personal anecdotes about my life and, analysis of the films. And so I did look to other books for ideas on structure. And so I don't know that, I know people always talk about House of Psychotic Women like it's, so original and everything. But honestly, the structure is very similar to a book by a guy named Sandy Balfour. He's a producer at the BBC. He wrote a book called Pretty Girl in Crimson Rose. And it's not a book any horror fan would likely pick up. It was really like a friend of mine who's like a big, she's sort of a big literary fan, a big reader, but not a horror fan at all, and doesn't like horror movies. And she gave me this book, and she's like, you should read this. This might help you with your structure ideas. And his book was basically about cryptic crossword puzzles, like the British cryptic crossword puzzles.
Huh.
And it was a story that went into detail about all these different kinds of puzzles and the history of the puzzles and how they work and everything else. But it was broken up by anecdotal stories that told stories of his marriage and his travels and, like various personal issues. And it wasn't as candid or anything as my book, but I would definitely attribute the structure of my book to that.
Oh. Cool. I've never heard of that book. I read a lot of books about movies, not just horror movies, but all kinds of film and music. But I hadn't seen a book like this. That it's kind of ballsy to do an autobiographical book, of someone who's not famous, I guess, or wasn't like I hadn't heard of you until I picked up this book. But now now I've gotten other stuff that you've written because I was so blown away by this. I don't know. I think it could appeal to. I think it makes it broader anyway. That it could appeal to people outside of horror fans. Anybody who's interested in psychology or just women in general could find this book interesting. I think. And
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I normally get books that are more reference guides, and I thought that I was getting that when I bought your book. I thought a reference guide to women having mental breakdowns on film, but then the whole the bulk of the book is more the autobiographical stuff juxtaposed with the films, and it's a great read. Like right at the beginning of the book, you say that every woman you've ever met in your life is completely crazy in one way or another, and why is it that female neurosis is so much more interesting? Because I agree, it's more interesting. Female neurosis is much more interesting than male neurosis, and these movies are much more interesting than. There's only so much you can do with men having mental breakdowns on film, and I think the bulk of the really great movies are more focused on women. Why do you think it's more interesting? I guess.
I think it just has to do with a history of control and a history of repression and stuff, and just culturally. One of the main things I discuss in the book, or that I try to, take issue with, is this idea of propriety, this idea of what is appropriate behavior for a woman, and it's so easy for men to tell a woman she's behaving inappropriately, if she isn't quiet, or if she, if she is assertive in any way, if she gets angry about things. It's very easy for men or male characters in movies to just dismiss everything that the woman believes because they just say, oh, well, you're acting crazy, you're acting hysterical, whereas men, it's frequently juxtaposed with this idea of a crazy man as just being oh, he's just an eccentric guy, and it's so a lot of the films are about women who have been, sort of culturally taught to hold things in, who've been taught to just not show your emotions, or people are going to, accuse you of being crazy, and then just seeing them let loose in, often the worst possible case scenario in these films, because in horror films everything is totally exaggerated,
Right.
So you get these amazing sequences of women going crazy that, exceeds the kind of drama that you would see in a regular drama film about a woman, having a nervous breakdown, perhaps, because you'll get movies like Possession, where you have this mental break taking the form, manifesting itself as a physical being, and same with the Brood or something,
Mm-hmm.
So you have these instances of anger and rage and stuff that create physical monsters. And so yeah, I don't know. I just think that, a lot of times, if you look at, let's say, Franco Nero, for example, in movies, he acts crazy in lots of movies, but it's just comedy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Everybody just laughs when Franco Nero acts crazy. But when Isabella Gianni acts crazy in a movie, it's heroin,
Sure.
So I think that's why I partially I respond to it more because I am a woman, so it's something that I'm more aware of. I'm hyper aware of representations of women in film because of that. But
No, I think it's true what you say about like the man just being the eccentric. Like in horror films, there's always like the goofball or the weird guy, as like a supporting character, and it's usually a male, and it's just kind of like, oh yeah, he's the quirky, weird guy, and it's not very often when it's a female, it's like a bigger deal, like oh something's wrong here, she's gonna do something. But in preparation for this interview, I watched Der Fan last night, which you've written about in this, and you also wrote about in the punk book, The Guide to Punks on Film.
Yeah, I think it's almost the same write-up that I used.
yeah. Well, I had that punk film, a book, what's it called, Destroy All Movies. Yeah, I had that a few years ago, but I didn't realize until I got your book that you had written for both of these.
Yeah.
And you've done other writing prior to this, right?
Yeah, I mean, I started writing, I guess, in like 1997. I had my first fanzine, and I think because of that fanzine, Tony Timpone at Fangoria gave me a job, covering some movies in Vancouver where I lived at the time for Fangoria. And so I started writing for them, and I started writing for Remorgue a bit, and just various different outlets, different magazines and books and stuff. And, I knew Harvey Fenton, who runs Fab Press, who is the publisher that did House of Psychotic Women, and my first book too.
What was your first book?
It was called A Violent Professional, and it was a book about the actor Luciano Rossi, who's kind of a Italian bit player.
Okay.
He was only in movies usually for like 5 minutes, and then he would get killed. And most of the time, he wouldn't be credited. And so that book is a bit more goofy. It's kind of written more fanzine style. But it was kind of a thing where I would watch a lot of these Italian crime movies or westerns, and there would be this guy, and I'd be like, oh, it's that guy again. But who is he, And at the time, IMDb had nothing on him, and like now he has a whole IMDb page and everything. And but at the time, the internet wasn't even used very much, so it was really new, and there was nothing you could find about him. So I spent years just trying to figure out who the hell this guy was, and eventually he died, and it was because he died that an obituary came out in Italy, and I was able to find, some information and track down some family members and stuff like that. But
wow, so you never got the chance to talk to him or anything, huh?
No, ironically, it was so sad because I finally got a hold of his nephew, who was like his closest living relative and the guy that kind of took care of him in the last years of his life. And he was like, oh my God, if my uncle only knew that you existed, he'd be so happy. He died like alone with no friends, and
wow.
Thinking that his whole life had been a failure, and I was, so it was just incredibly sad, like that I never got to meet him before he passed away.
Yeah, I'd like to read that because I've never really heard of him. I know I'm just dipping my toes into those like violent Italian. What's the name of those violent Italian cop thrillers? I know there's a name for that.
Like Policetti.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah, and Giallo films. He's in Giallo films and stuff too.
Oh, cool.
So you may, if you watch Giallo films, you may have seen him before.
Yeah, I watch as many of those as I can. Cool. Yeah, I'll have to look for that. Is that on Fab Press? Fab Press released that one as well?
That's Fab Press also, yeah.
All right.
But yeah, so it was just like doing fanzines and doing different magazine articles. So and I would go to, I ran a little film festival in Vancouver called Cinemuerte that was a horror film festival. So I ran for, I think, 6 or 7 years. And during that time, I would go to the Fantasia Festival in Montreal every summer to sort of scout for films and stuff. And that was where I met Harvey Fenton and, started to get a bit more serious about writing and stuff.
And you've done film programming for a while now, right?
Yeah. Well, that started with my festival. So when I did Cinemuerte, that was the first time I'd ever programmed, and I just kind of like went into it not knowing what I was doing, or, I just started a festival like out of nothing with no experience. And then because of that, I got a job at the Alamo Draft House in Austin, which was also relatively new. I think they'd only been around for 3 or 4 years at that time, and they just started doing specialty programming and wanted some. Actually, they didn't even hire me as a programmer at first. They just wanted me to work there as a manager or something at the theater. And but then I just arrived at the time when it was sort of calendar deadline time, and Tim needed me to work on getting some films booked because I had experience doing it. And then he was like, "Oh, wow, that was so easy. I've never had anybody else programming with me before, so let's keep you doing this." And so then I was like the head programmer there for 4 years.
Very, very cool. And you had your own movie theater for a while, right?
Yeah, I had one failed movie theater in Vancouver, very short-lived, right before I went to work at the Alamo. And then a few years ago, I started a little micro-cinema in Montreal with my friend Dave Bertrand called Blue Sunshine. And we had a 2-year lease on that place, so we ran it for 2 years. And ultimately, the place was too expensive, so we didn't renew the lease. But it was great. Yeah, we ran it like 4 nights a week, 3 nights a week of movies, and then 1 night a week of the, I don't know if you've heard of the Miskatonic Institute of Horror Studies, but it's like a little horror school that I started.
I saw something on the internet that you're doing classes in London or something with that.
Yeah, so it opens, there's a new school opening in London in January, but it's been running largely in Montreal. Like, I started it before I moved to Montreal, but Montreal is where it really kind of took off. And so we would have the Miskatonic classes on Wednesday nights, and then we'd have movies 3 nights a week. And, so it was kind of a full-time job running it, and it was great. It was really fun.
Very cool. I remember you had some Lovecraft references in your book, too. You're a big Lovecraft fan, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
definitely as a teenager.
Yeah,
I was. So
I hear a cat in the background too, huh?
Mhm.
Cool.
Yeah, it's just my cat wanting to be fed.
Right. Cool. So what are you working on now? Like.
Well, I just published this summer. I started my own company called Spectacular Optical. That's like a publishing small print publishing company. And our first book, and my partner in that is Paul Korup, who runs the website Connexploitation.com. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
I reference that quite often.
Yeah, so Paul he's an amazing editor, and so the two of us, kind of work on these projects together. And so the first Spectacular Optical book just came out this summer. It's called Kid Power, and it's all about cult film and television, like the role of kids in cult film and television. And most of it tends to be kids' films, like films that are actually made for kids that are covered in the book. But it does have some horror movies and stuff like that as well.
Yeah, I got
child characters.
Very cool. I have the copyright in front of me here of Kid Power.
Oh, great.
I'm a big fan now. So I was traveling and it was waiting for me right when I got back home from traveling. So yeah, I've most of these movies covered in here. I've never seen things like Hawk Jones and Chalky, and I've only seen a couple of them. I've seen like Kenny the Kid Brother, and but no, you write some of the articles as well in here.
Yeah. I mean, I had a few. I wanted to do I wanted something on the Disney movies. A lot of times, the fact that I do it myself is usually because either, I kind of wait until the end and see what's handed in, and then I do a few things at the end to sort of round it out, Mm-hmm. And so I had an opportunity to interview John Huff because I had met his son at a festival, because his son had made a horror film called The Human Race that was, that had been doing the festival circuit for the last couple of years. And so I met him, and, so he hooked me up with his dad, and that was like an amazing experience, going to John Huff's house and interviewing him there. And, and then I also was like, I'm a big fan of after-school specials. And I'm also just a big fan of like who's who type articles that like break down everybody and where they are now and all this kind of stuff. And so I tried to do that for the after school specials with a lot of the child actors and stuff.
Yeah, I'm looking at that. You cover quite a few people, even actors who are only in like 1 or 2 movies and faded into obscurity.
I tried to do everybody that was in at least 2, mm-hmm. and then a couple of them that like a selected amount that were in just one. Because the thing is, there's like double the amount of people if you pick people who are in just one. And many of them are famous, like many of them are like Michelle Pfeiffer or Val Kilmer or whatever. And I was like, well, everybody knows who Val Kilmer is, so I don't really need to be, wasting paper writing like Val Kilmer is an actor that blah, 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 like everybody knows that. So I kind of wanted to focus more on actors that were key to that time, maybe that didn't, whose reputations didn't really carry on until now, and give them a bit of a highlight,
Cool. How do you select writers for this? Like, are these a lot of people wrote the different essays in here, or were you taking submissions?
For Kid Power, it's all people I know. So it's like for Kid Power, it was all people I'd worked with in some capacity before. And so it was relatively easy and informal, how it all got put together. For the next book, we're working on editing a book right now, and it's in pre-production, so a lot of the pieces have come in. They're being copy edited and stuff. But our newest book is about the Satanic Panic of the 1980s, and it's like basically looking at it through the prism of media specifically, So there's different writers writing about, there's one piece just about the Satanic Geraldo episode, and there's a piece about satanic paperback pulp novels of the 80s, and there's one about the very first novel, paperback, that kicked it all off, Michelle Remembers, and the TV movies made about like the McMartin preschool trials. And so it's not like a history book or a religion book. It's more like just talking about different types of media and the way that the Satanic Panic was propagated through these different forms of media.
Oh, that's awesome. I kind of lived through that. I was homeschooled by religious parents, and then I was born in the mid '80s and '90s, and I had this. I was sent to summer camp when I was like 5 or 6 years old. I picked up this book called Saturday Morning Mind Control. It had a teenage mutant ninja turtle coming out of the television, like warping all these kids' minds, and it was amazing. It was just like about how all the children's cartoons, the 80s, have all these occult influences, and they're like Yoda was, actually this ancient demon, and E.T. was based on some other old, some writing from Aleister Crowley. It's insane. It's awesome. And that book was like my Bible growing up. I would just, instead of reading, my church stuff, I would just be reading Saturday Morning Mind Control and looking at all these, finding the sinister implications and all in the Care Bears and stuff. So I'm looking forward.
There's a whole chapter on that too.
Oh, right.
On that book and the different books that deal with like the idea of toys and cartoons having satanic influences and stuff.
It's great. I hope that the world is filled with. I want that book to be real. That everything's really evil in this whole satanic conspiracy to get us. Yeah, I don't know. That's all. So when's that? Is that due for 2015? Some point?
Yeah, I mean, originally we were shooting for end of March, but I think it's more likely to be June, July when it comes out.
I will.
Yeah. So, and for that one, the way that we got the writers was a bit different. It was sort of like half people we knew, and then we also had a call for submissions because we knew that we needed some expertise that was specialized, and we wanted to sort of open it up to the world and see who responded. And so we ended up picking, I would say about 10 people from the call of submissions, which is pretty good. I mean, it's almost like half the book of chapters written by people who had submitted proposals. And so that's been more interesting because it's a bit more contractual. There's like legal contracts and, because these are strangers. They're not necessarily people I know or anything. So I have to be much more transparent throughout the whole process and give a lot of updates and everything to make them know that it's a real book and it's happening and they're going to get paid and stuff like that. But so far it's been coming together really well, and a lot of the pieces are really interesting. A lot of the topics that people chose to write about are really, I think it's sort of covering the gamut a lot. So
yeah, I'm glad you got a book in there about, or a chapter in there about the Saturday morning mind control stuff. Because I was going to say I could write an essay about that. That was my childhood. But yeah, I'll be pre-ordering that. So your plans for Spectacular Optical? Do you plan to like release maybe like a book every year on different subjects?
I'd like to do 2 a year.
Oh, cool.
But it's all going to depend on, it kind of depends on people handing stuff in. Whenever you do anthology type things, or work with, authors, if I'm not writing it, or even if I am writing it myself, I'm like the latest ever handing stuff in. Mm-hmm. But, so it's like it all depends on people handing stuff in. And then how fast and how easily we can get high-res images for everything. But ideally I would like to be doing 2 a year. So we do have several other ones that are sort of down the pipeline that we haven't really begun any serious work on yet. So I don't want to announce them or anything.
No, that's all right. We got enough to go on here with the Satanic Panic and the Kid Power, but yeah, everything you've covered or everything you've written about, it's been, filled a gap. I think, and it's stuff that I haven't seen written about before, or you're approaching it from a new angle. So it's all, must grip material. There.
Cool.
Was House of Psychotic Women a big success? I saw that it came out in a different cover with like Let's Scare Jessica to Death. Cover.
That's the second edition. So the first edition sold out, and then he made a second edition with a new cover. I don't know that it's been. I think for Fab Press, it's been successful, like based on what because they're a niche publication, company that deals with, mostly fairly small runs of stuff, So I think for them it was a successful book. But in terms of something like, it's, you can't see it at the airport or something.
Yeah, well, no,
it's not. For me,
like...
if you see it at the airport, then it's successful.
That's what you're going for. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I read it on an airplane actually, so part of it. Yeah. I went up to LA when you were showing some movies at the silent movie theater. It was my friend's birthday, so I took her out to LA, and also your like a week-long run or something was happening of movies, and you were there. Did you tour around with this a lot, like showing movies in different places?
Well, I didn't really tour around with it a lot, but I still do it a little bit. It's just like, it's something that for film programmers, it's such an easy thing to program. It's just like, there's so many films in the book that, a lot of programmers would love to have an excuse to program, but a lot of times when you're programming, especially rep stuff, they really need to tie it in with something, for it to be part of the cultural consciousness or whatever. In order to get the press to care about it or whatever. And so I think for a lot of programmers, they looked at my book as like, oh, we can get a lot out of this. And so it has been pretty interesting how programmers around the world have responded to it, because I've been invited to, like, as far away as Australia and Amsterdam and everything, like, to go and introduce film programs of stuff that's like based on the book. So for the last 2 years, pretty much since it came out, I've been traveling around a lot, just introducing screenings and stuff like that related to the book, and being part of panels and things like that. And hopefully I can, I'm hoping with the Spectacular Optical books to do the same thing. So. Well,
I saw stuff posted on the internet in like Philadelphia, and I guess you're based in Toronto, so there's Toronto screenings and screenings in Philadelphia of some of the children's, and I think you've been there for those, right? Like you've been touring a little bit in the United States.
Yeah.
We'd love to get you to come to Cleveland. We have a Cinematheque here, so we could easily arrange getting some of those movies if you. It's not too.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever been to Cleveland.
It's only like 5 or 6 hours from Toronto. Not too far. You could do the Rust Belt tour, hit up Pittsburgh and Buffalo and Cleveland. We have long, harsh winters and nothing to look forward to, so it's all movie. Yeah. I'm just at the Cinematheque every weekend or whatever, watching movies. So how's the reaction been? Have you have a lot of fans, or has anybody been like angered by your book, or pretty good reaction?
Which one?
House of Psychotic Women, I guess, would be the most would probably inspire the biggest reactions, I'd say.
Well, it's been surprisingly well received. It was so weird because when I put it out there, I was sure everyone would hate it. I was sure this would be the last thing I ever do creatively because I'm going to have to go underground because people are going to hate it so much. And I just kept waiting. I had my fist clenched. I'm like waiting for these like Twitter comments or whatever that are slagging my book. And, you know, I was just expecting it. And I just kept waiting and it wasn't really coming. And people seemed to like it. And I was like totally surprised by that. It wasn't what I expected at all. And I mean, I have had a couple of sort of weirdos, you know, emailing me that are angry about it and that seem to have their own personal kind of issues that they're projecting onto it, and they're getting mad at me as though I'm doing these things to them.
Yeah.
And, but I mean, these are not rational people. Like any rational person who emails me a problem, I'll go back and forth with them or whatever. But, you know, I've had some of these things where, okay, these are not rational things. This is just like abuse, you know?
Right,
like,
yeah, better not to respond, just delete that stuff. Well, cool. Do you have a lot of female fans, you think, too? Or is it more I know the horror film is dominated, you know, by males. I guess there's more at the... Actually,
there's tons of women. They're less visible, maybe, because they're not... there's... I would say like half the horror scene is women.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, but they're just not as loud and obnoxious as the guys. So maybe people don't notice them as much. But I mean, when I started doing a festival in Vancouver, I mean, you can really see like who's coming, right? You can see who's coming in the door, who's buying tickets, you know. And by the time the festival ended in like 2005 or 2006, it was half women. And they were coming by themselves or with other women. Like, they weren't just coming with boyfriends or something.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I've seen it only grow, like, since then. So it's just, there's tons of women horror fans. And a lot of them do, when I go and I do events in person, there's a lot of women that come up and talk to me and stuff. And also, surprisingly, a lot of other women who relate to the book, you know, because saying things like in the first chapter that, like, every woman I've met is crazy is not a way to win friends, you know?
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I was in the coffee shop this morning, and I was telling somebody, you know, like, oh, I got an interview. And it's an author who wrote a book about about female neurosis and psychotic women, and the girl working at the coffee shop said the same. She's like, well, every woman's completely crazy, so that should be an interest. And I was like, actually, she wrote, I was like, that's the opening, like, in the opening chapter of her book, she says that. And she's like, yeah, it's true. So
the thing is, when you talk, like, women try, you know, like, the thing is, like, I've said this before, like, so I'm repeating myself, but I really think it's, like, not necessarily a bad thing for all women to be crazy. It just depends on, like, how you look at craziness, you know, and what you think it is and how you think it works. And to me, I look at it more like we have this card up our sleeve.
Yeah.
You know? And it's kind of like you can bring it out or not.
Yeah.
And you have a choice of, like, when to use it. And so to me, it's kind of like we have this capability of being intensely emotional, you know, in a way that I don't think that I've never experienced men being, you know.
Right.
And to me, it's like it's a great thing to be able to have that release, you know, to be able to have that perspective. I think that a lot of women, when I talk to them personally, they'll all say similar things. They'll be like, yeah, every woman I've met is crazy. And it's not something that you want to say flippantly because you know it'll get read in a way that gives people license to then dismiss what women say, you know. And that's not what it means. It means more like there's an intensity there, you know, that...
And a mystery, too. Women are much more mysterious. Like, I like movies where, like...
they are. I think they are. Maybe they are to men. I think women can read each other a little better.
Yeah, but. Sure. I mean, like, filmmakers like Robert Altman, you know, like, you cover a lot of his movies, you know, like Images or Three Women, where, you know, it's just, like, you can just tell it's like somebody who's fascinated and perplexed by the female, you know, the female mind.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I like about those movies being directed by men. You know, like a lot of people are like, well, all these movies are directed by men, so they don't count, or they don't have, you know, their representations of women don't count. And I'm like, that's bullshit, you know, because if that's their experience of women, that's valid, you know. Every man who has a girlfriend or a wife or a female friend or whatever has their experience of that woman, you know. So why is his experience not valid? And so I love seeing those films, you know, and like Bergman films and everything, like where they're clearly fascinated by women, and trying to figure out like how they work, you know. And I think a lot of horror films do that, but they do it in this very fantastical way, you know.
Yeah, they make it it's much more interesting than if it was just you know, Diary of a Mad Housewife or something.
Yeah.
Well, I've never seen that movie. Maybe that's pretty good. But, I gravitate toward... I'd probably pick up, you know, Der Fan over Diary of a Mad Housewife or something.
Well, I'm watching all the Mary Hartman episodes right now, and I don't know if you've ever seen Mary Hartman.
No, I haven't.
She's, like, highly neurotic housewife. It's a very famous show from the 70s because it was like a fake soap opera, but it was on every day like a soap opera. So... and it's just like it's like a satire of a soap opera with this very, very neurotic housewife at the center.
Yeah, see, it seems like you're pulling stuff from like Mary Hart. You find a lot like a wealth of information from like unexpected sources, and that's another thing in your book. Like some movies that I read that I'm a big fan of a lot of the movies in your book, but there was a few that I'd kind of like dismissed, then you pull out like a different meaning that I hadn't seen from those films, which like it seems like you find a lot from whatever you watch.
Yeah,
I'm sure you have to wade through your own. You have to wade through some crap, as well. But in order to find these, is there anything you've seen like since the book came out that you wish you had written about?
Oh yeah, there's lots. I actually have a whole document that I'm keeping where I'm like writing. Like if I remember, I'm trying to put them in this document so that if I ever do like a 10th anniversary update of the book or anything like that, I can add them. So,
yeah, that would be.
I mean, like movies, like I think the same summer that the book came out was when, like Excision came out and The Pact, and both of those movies would have been in the book if I'd seen them earlier. And Excision, actually, the short film I had seen, and I had forgotten to put it in the book, so I meant to put the short film of Excision in there. But so those things would be in there for sure, and like The Babadook would be in there, and. I don't know. There's tons of like. I just watched this Francois Ozon movie called See the Sea that I had never seen, and that was like amazing. And so that would be in there. Like so I just keep a list, and I just tell all my friends if you come across anything, like keep telling me titles, because I'll someday I'll do an updated version and add more. The titles to the appendix. So
I emailed you a little bit on the summer. I was buying Kid Power, and I had given you the wrong address. But I wrote to you one called Eliza's Horoscope that I would highly recommend.
Yes, which I put on the list. Yeah. Yeah,
I mean it's this like girl wandering around Montreal in like 1969, I think, and she's like trying to. It's so weird. She's just like everything's based on her horoscope, and like she's looking for somebody like a Sagittarius, and she meets Tommy Lee Jones, and he's this crazy Indian who's trying to blow up a bridge. But it's warped. It was like the life work of this one guy. One of those movies that like the guy never directed anything else, Gordon Shepherd, but he put like everything he had into this film, and it's real weird. I don't know. I think it's up your alley.
Wow.
Cool. So do you have any filmmaking ambition yourself, or do you just want to keep writing?
Not really. I don't want to make films at all. I'm sure they would be terrible if I tried to make films. But
I don't know, because I feel like people who have good taste should. It's my theory, if you're watching good films, you should have enough influences to just copy the good obscure ones like Quentin Tarantino does. Copy.
I don't know. I know a lot of people who are writers and programmers and stuff who like try to make their own movies, and I find that like when you know too much about movies, it's all over your movie, It's like It's just so full of references, and it's just like a wink and a nod to all the other fans like you, and it's not working as a movie on its own. And I know, like, because I wrote a script once on a dare. It was like the only script I ever wrote, and it was called Emmanuel in Chinatown. And which I wrote an Emmanuel movie because I thought it would be easy. I'm like, well, how hard can it be to write just like a dumb sex movie where continuity doesn't matter and, whatever. So I'm trying to write it like a Joe D'Amato movie or something. And it was still really hard. Even to write a stupid movie was hard. And it was full of like Badfinger references and like all this stupid shit, and I was like, I can't escape this. I can't escape from wanting to insert my personality and my interests into this movie. And, so I know that if it was made, it would just be ridiculous. So
I don't know. I'd check it. I'd check out Emmanuel in Chinatown, I guess, if you wrote it, if that came out. Yeah, I know. I'm a big fan of Werner Herzog, and I know he warns movie directors don't you shouldn't, if you want to be a movie director, you shouldn't watch too many movies. You should read more and try not to watch too many movies because you're in danger of just emulating or copying or something, I guess.
Well, and it's not even just copying. The other thing and then this is also behind like why I don't. When I was doing House of Psychotic Women, I was trying to avoid reading a lot of other criticism about the movies I was writing about, because what happens is inevitably you read other people's books or essays or whatever and find that they're saying a lot of the same shit that you're saying, and then it's just depressing. It's like depressing to continue, because you're like, oh, nothing I say is original,
So it's better to be sheltered in your own, absorbed in your own mind, your own writing. Cool.
So I do agree with that to a certain extent. I think you need to know something about movies because, it is important to know what's out there already. But I also think you can get too influenced or too demoralized or whatever from other people's work.
Right. Have you got a chance to meet or talk to a lot of your heroes through all your film writing, like interview people and or have people come out for film festivals? Most
of them.
Wow, really?
I've met most people that I've ever wanted to meet. It's crazy. I mean, and part of that's from film programming mostly, because like when you work at festivals or a theater like the Alamo where we had special guests every 3 days, so we were flying people in like every 3 days, and it was like a crazy job because it was just like you're dealing with all these exciting people come in that you want to come in, but the workload is so insane you don't even have time to get excited about it because like you're also planning 6 other celebrity visits at the same time, and But yeah, it was so it was crazy. I mean, the only person I haven't met and that I kind of don't want to meet is Kristy Mcnichol.
Oh wow!
She's like Kristy Mcnichol's like, she was my first sort of role model as a kid, and I just always want to keep somebody on that pedestal, like
right.
I want to keep somebody, when I was a kid and I would look at famous people and think like they were on this other level from me, like they're like just. I can't even fathom how amazing their lives must be and, how talented they are. And, they were just like these upper level people to me. And then growing up, you start meeting a lot of these people and you're like, oh, everybody's just a person and we're all normal and we all have the same issues and stuff. But the more that would happen, the more I would kind of miss that like little childlike feeling of excitement of just being a fan, And so I just wanted to keep that. So I was just like, all right, well, I'm just not going to try to ever meet Kristy Mcnichol so that I can always have that feeling like I have like a hero,
Right. I just heard on our radio station a couple weeks ago. There's a Friday night show and they were playing some disco tunes. And he's a dancer came on. I didn't even know she had a singing career. But then this like killer song comes on. I was like, who did? And I'm like texting him like, who is this playing right now? And then I find out it's Kristy Mcnichol. I was like, oh my God, she's a singer too. It's great stuff.
A little bit. She had like a couple albums with her brother and stuff.
Yeah. Jimmy McNichol, he's cool too. I run like a DIY movie theater here, and I screened Butcher Baker Nightmare Maker, and he's good in that too. Yeah, I love Susan Tyrrell. She's one of my favorites. But I like these. in movies or in music, I like to or in real life, I like to gravitate towards these like strong women. Like they're the most interesting people, and so this I had seen a lot of the movies in this book already, but at least more than half of them I had never heard of. So things like The Beguiled and Their Fan, that just kind of so much great stuff, and so many I haven't watched yet. Ma Fu Cage, that was really good. It's like.
Well, The Beguiled I hadn't heard of until right before I wrote it. I was like finishing the book, and so I sent an email out to a bunch of friends of mine, like movie nerd friends, and I'm just like, can you think of anything that's not on this list? Like, what am I missing that's really important? And I think it was Sean Smithson, who's one of the he writes sometimes for Twitch and Fangoria and stuff, and he was like, The Beguiled, how come The Beguiled isn't on there? And I'm like, what is that? I don't know what that is. And but it's one of those things where you watch it and you're like, how haven't I heard of this movie? It's like Don Siegel and Clint Eastwood.
And just those two making that made it so, I didn't know they made anything that messed up, because it's really a messed up movie, and like I've seen their other movies they've made together, which, are good, but The Beguiled's on a different level. That's Clint Eastwood, just, I've never seen him in a role like that, or... It's incredible.
It's a lot like Misery.
Yeah, it is a lot like Misery times,
like
12 or something.
Misery.
Yeah. Only, that's one of the more fitting ones for the title of the book.
Yeah.
Very cool. Have you ever like re-released any movies or released soundtracks to any of these films, or done anything like that?
No, I've thought about it, but. I have a lot of friends who do DVDs and Blu-rays, and I just see them agonizing over these transfers and stuff, and I'm just like, oh God. And then the fans like just attack them instantly, like when the DVDs come out, and all the forums are like, there's like 0.23 of a second missing from this transfer, and there's like a speck of dust on it, so it looks like shit. And and I just see my friends like going through like a year of work on like one transfer, and then in like a second on the internet it gets destroyed. So I don't know that because the thing is, if I did something, it would be just to get the movie out. It wouldn't necessarily be because I have the money or the time to be doing like a crazy restoration on the film or anything.
Right. Yeah.
But of course, I would love for like some of the old Canadian kids classics, like some of the things I write about in the books, that like Jacob Tutu, and things like that have never been properly released. If
that movie sounds insane. Yeah, I was reading about that. That sounds really the kid jail and the weird creatures and stuff. The wrestlers. That sounds. I love a lot of Canadian movies. They do like boner comedies better than anybody else. They do, like, for a while there, like anytime like an American movie, like big comedy come out, there'd be the Canadian ripoff, which was always way better and like way more insane, like King Frat after Animal House, or Screwballs, or Recruits, or any of those. I find that fascinating that Canada released these more messed up versions, that were more surreal and funnier than their American counterparts. And Canadian horror films like The Pit has been a long time favorite of mine since I was a teenager. That cover, the kid pushing the old lady in the wheelchair into that pit full of monsters. I remember seeing that as like a 14-year-old, and I wasn't allowed to rent it, but I was like, I have to get this.
That isn't the cover that we had. That was the cover you had for The Pit?
That's the one I remember seeing at the video store. I was probably like 12 at the time, and the cover was the kid pushing the old lady in the wheelchair into the pit full of monsters. I don't remember what.
Ours was just
what
like
video
the
store
kid holding the teddy bear.
That probably wouldn't have intrigued me as much if I had seen that. But that image created in my mind. You see the little monsters at the bottom, and I was like, oh man, that's what is this? Like that image just stuck in my mind. There's certain covers that really, like The Stuff, the people melting, at the video store. Like there's just certain covers I remember as a kid, because I wasn't allowed to like rent anything, so I had to wait to be 16, and the only video store was Blockbuster. I got a job there right away, but they didn't have most of these things I wanted to watch. So it's been it's been a lot of. Do you have a second? We had people trying to call. I don't know if you're up for taking a caller off the air or answering questions.
Yeah, sure.
Whoever was calling, if you want to call back, 216-687-3515, and you can speak with Kier La Janisse. That's 216-687-3515. So we're almost at the end of the show. Yeah, I encourage people to buy both these books. You can get them online. Do you have like a website they can buy these?
Yeah, my website is spectacularoptical.ca, and that's where you can get Kid Power. But House of Psychotic Women is published by Fab Press. That's FAB, and so I believe their website is just fabpress.com. But it's if you buy from their website, it's going to involve shipping from the UK. So you're probably better off either going to a local bookstore or going to Amazon to get it.
Right. Yeah, I got your book. I know I pre-ordered Kid Power because you were making like a mix of kid tunes, which was really cool.
Yeah.
I like music recorded by kids or kid bands or whatever.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, and that music is actually I posted it on my Mixcloud just recently. So now.
Oh, it's available online.
Yeah. So now people can hear that mix.
Where is that? Can you get that off the Spectacular Optical website?
Yeah, if you go on the Spectacular Optical website, there's a Mixcloud player at sort of the bottom corner, and you can either click right on that and listen to it, or you can click on it and it'll take you to my Mixcloud page that has all the different themed mixes I've made and stuff on it.
Cool. My friend Haley wanted to ask a question. She texted me something. We kind of covered this, but she says the biographical part of House of Psychotic Women felt a lot like any number of films that would fit in the book. Would you be opposed to if somebody wanted to make a movie inspired by your part of the story? Would you be opposed to that? By your own life, I guess.
I have had a couple people ask me about it. None of them came to anything, but so I've said, my main thing is that like already writing a book about your life. You're writing about the life of other people,
Yeah.
And so my family members were not happy about this book, and it took a long time. It's still going on. Like some people in the family won't talk to me because of it.
Oh wow.
And so it's already kind of bad enough in a book where I've changed people's names and stuff like that. But a movie is like potentially a higher profile thing than a book. And so that, so I would only really consider doing it if it was changed enough that there would be even less identifiers to my actual family members, Like I really don't. Some of the stuff that happened to my mom, I don't really want to see in a movie, unless that character is changed significantly enough so that it's not really a representation of my mom, But I do think that there's probably material like I would actually I'd rather it be like a TV series.
Yeah.
Like, to me, it seems more like in order to really get into the characters at the complexity or the level that you need a bit more time than a movie. I feel like if it was a movie, it might be kind of hokey. Like a really hokey version of Girl Interrupted or something like that.
Right.
But I feel like when it's a TV show, people get into melodrama much easier in the television format. Like shit can get really cheesy, and people are hooked, so they don't care. So it's not something I'd be opposed to, but I think that it just would have to be changed a bit. Like whoever would write it would have to be given license to change it enough so that it kind of maintains the core of it or some of the anecdotes from it without being like a direct adaptation that would be about my family members, so.
Cool. And a lot of your writing on this, the kids' book, it's all, basically like the 70s and 80s, or the bulk of it anyway. Are there still, do you still think there's quality like kid programming coming out nowadays or television shows that you've seen?
I honestly, I don't know that much about kids programming now. My brother has kids, and so sometimes I'll see the stuff they watch, which I think is totally stupid.
Yeah.
But I don't know what's out there that they're not watching,
Right.
So maybe they're just, they like Bob the Builder, and I know Bob the Builder has like a character that's voiced by like Noddy Holder from Slade, so I'm just like, okay. So one of the guys from Slade does a voice on it, so I guess maybe it's not so bad. But some of the shows they watch are just like I wouldn't show my kids those shows.
It's the way that a lot of them look too. They're just visually not appealing. You know, like a lot of the animation's really lazy nowadays, and
it's so cheap looking. And the thing is, like, you know, like some of the parents now, they look back at our era of shows and they're like, oh, that stuff looked cheap. You know, like Scooby-Doo, because it's like you know, they have recycled animation and stuff. And I'm like, sorry, Scooby-Doo does not look remotely as cheap as like the Backyardigans.
Yeah.
But in general, I don't know that much about what's coming out for kids, and I also don't have TV, so I don't see like a lot of the sort of Adult Swim animated shows that are coming out that might be appropriate for kids to watch and stuff.
I mean, it sounds like you're busy with a billion projects anyway, so you probably don't have time for watching television.
Yeah, but it is something
shows.
I probably should do if I'm going to be making statements about how things used to be compared to how they are now. I should probably be paying more attention to what's happening now.
I think I say go ahead and make those statements. Why not? I'm, you know, I didn't grow up in the 70s, but I still say the 70s was the best decade, you know, ever for like movies and music and television. The most.
Yeah. Well, it was an interesting time for sure.
Cool.
Yeah, there's just so many changes happening, and like a lot of the kids' programming was very dark because of things that were happening in real life.
Yeah, that's what I miss is the darkness, you know, like which your book covers really well. But yeah, it seems to be missing, I guess, from what I see my nephews watching.
Yeah. Well, I'm also working on like my next project that I'll be doing that's like my own writing, like my own sort of next book, is also going to be about kids, films, and television, but it's going to be much broader than the Kid Power book, you know, and much more comprehensive. So,
all right. So do you think that'll come out in 2015 or
no?
Yes, it's a while away from that.
Many years, I think, before it comes out because it's going to take a lot of work and it's covering. Like I'm trying to be fairly comprehensive in terms of culty shows and movies, you know. And there's so many, it's insane. So there's a lot to cover.
Well, yeah, I can't wait to read that. Definitely get it whenever that is released. Thanks so much for coming on to the show. And I know you only said you could do a half hour, but you were on for a full hour, and appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk to us. And if your schedule ever frees up enough to drive the 5 or 6 hours to Cleveland, you know, like to show some movies or, you know, present some stuff, whether kids movies or psychotic women movies, whatever. We have some theaters here that I'm sure could you know, pay you for your time and stuff. So keep it in mind. Cleveland wants you.
All right.
Cool.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Well, have a good day, and thanks again.
All right. You too. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. That's the end of the show. That was Kier La Janisse, and I highly recommend checking out her books. The ones we just covered: House of Psychotic Women, Kid Power, A Violent Professional, which I haven't read yet, and check out her website, Spectacular Optical. The Big O's on next. Thanks for tuning in. I'll be back on Wednesday. I'll be back on Wednesday, Christmas Eve, 2 days from now, to play music. I didn't have time to play much music, so I'll be on Wednesday from 3 to 5 p.m. if you want to hear a set of Christmas tunes, merry, festive, holiday jingles.